Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Portland, Oregon's premier citizens forum. We're delighted you're with us today. I'm Don Williams, president of City Club. Today's debate features the three leading Democratic candidates for Oregon Secretary of State. All are currently state senators: Kate Brown, Rick Metsger, and Vicki Walker. The debate will be moderated by Rod Grammer, Executive News Director of KGW News Channel 8. We're so fortunate in Portland to have great corporate citizens who help make these forums possible, and I'd like you to join me in thanking our sponsors this quarter: Zimmer Gunsel Frasca Architects, Key Bank, and the law firm of Schwabe Williamson and Wyatt. And now for our program. I'll introduce our moderator, Rod Grammer, who will introduce the candidates. And we're fortunate to have a moderator today who has both practical and sustained experience on election campaigns. Rod Grammer is Executive News Director at KGW Northwest News. Rod came to KGW in 1998. He's a television executive and personality. He's an experienced newspaper journalist, and he's an author. Before KGW, Mr. Grammer was the executive news director at the NBC affiliate in Boise, where he managed the news department and hosted a public affairs show. Previously, Rod was also the editorial page editor of the Idaho Statesman, and to round out his experience, he's also the co-author of an award-winning biography. His book, Fighting the Odds, The Life and Times of Senator Frank Church, was published in 1994. I'm also proud to say that Rod has a connection with City Club. In 1994, he was a founding member of the City Club of Boise. We'd also like to express our great appreciation for KGW for loaning us Rod today and 2 weeks ago, Russ Lewis, for the mayoral debate. We greatly appreciate it. Before turning the program over to Rod, I'd like to remind everyone that City Club endeavors to facilitate open and spirited debate and discussion of important public issues. Now, while it may be a challenge, we ask you to contain your enthusiasm for our candidates and hold your applause until the end of the debate. Please join me in welcoming Rod Grammer.
Thank you, Don. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It is my privilege to moderate this debate between the leading Democratic candidates seeking their party's nomination for Secretary of State: Senator Kate Brown, Senator Rick Metsger, and Senator Vicki Walker. As only one Republican candidate, former television news journalist Rick Dancer, is running for the Republican primary for this office, it is likely that the winner of the Democratic primary will face Mr. Dancer in the general election come this November. This debate will have several sections. First, each candidate will give a 3-minute opening statement. The opening statements will be given in alphabetical order. Our timekeeper today is John Horvick. Following the opening statements, candidates will respond to questions suggested in advance of this meeting by members of the City Club and the general public. A subcommittee of the City Club's Friday Forum Committee selected and edited the final set of questions. These are the only questions that will be asked today. There will be no questions from the floor. We will rely on the judgment of our distinguished panel of City Club members seated at the table in front of me to decide whether or not the questions have indeed been answered by the candidates. If 2 or more of these members raise their cards indicating that they feel the question has not been answered, I will restate the question and ask the candidate to reply again. Our panel today On our panel today, we have Leslie Johnson, Eva Schweber, and Richard York. On our panel, following the City Club's questions, each candidate will have the opportunity to ask one question of another candidate. And following the rotation of candidate questions, each candidate will make a 2-minute closing statement. Please be respectful of the candidates, and please hold all applause until the end of the program. And now I'll introduce the candidates. Kate Brown earned a BA in Environmental Conservation and Women's Studies from the University of Colorado at Boulder. After graduating from college, Ms. Brown moved to Oregon, where she received her law degree and certificate in environmental law from the Northwestern School at Lewis and Clark College. Ms. Brown practiced family and juvenile law, taught at Portland State University, and worked with the Juvenile Rights Project. Ms. Brown was first elected to the Oregon House of Representatives in 1991, where she served 2 terms, before being elected to the Oregon State Senate in 1996. In 1998, with the Democrats in the minority, Ms. Brown was elected Senate Democratic leader. And in 2004, with Senate Democrats squarely in the majority, she became the state's first woman Senate Majority Leader. Senator Brown has served as chair of the Senate Rules and Elections Committees. A graduate of Centennial High School in Gresham, Senator Metsger earned his bachelor's and master's degrees from Lewis and Clark College. Mr. Metsger began his professional career as a teacher at Sam Barlow High School in Gresham and as an assistant basketball coach at Lewis and Clark, but later went on to work for 16 years as a television news anchorman for Coin TV. In 1998, Mr. Metsger was elected to the Oregon Senate. In 2006, Senator Metsger served as chair of the Senate Special Commission on Educational Excellence, and he currently chairs the Business, Transportation, and Economic Development Committee and the Interim Senate Committee on Transportation. Senator Metsger also serves on the Senate Interim Committee on Education, and he is the Senate appointee to the State Debt Policy Advisory Committee, chaired by the State Treasurer. Vicki Walker graduated from Reedsport High School in 1974 and received her bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Oregon in 1978. Ms. Walker later attended a court reporting training program at Lane Community College and has been a court reporter for 25 years, operating her own small business. She served as chair of the Lane County Democratic Central Committee from 1992 to 1994 and was first elected to the Oregon House of Representatives in 1998, where she served 2 terms. In 2002, voters elected Ms. Walker to the Oregon State Senate, and she was re-elected in 2006 for another 4-year term. Since 2005, Senator Walker has served as chair of the Senate Education and General Government Committee, served on Ways and Means Education Subcommittee, and the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Walker has served on numerous committees and task forces on topics ranging from renewable energy, health care, youth suicide prevention, education, and school district auditing. At this point, if the candidates would please take their positions at the podium.
You are? Okay. It was shorter.
Senator Brown, if you could please start with a 3-minute opening statement.
Good afternoon, and thank you. Thank you to my colleagues, and thank you to the City Club for hosting us today. Secretary of State, more than any other position in state government, this is the one office that is most directly relevant to the City Club's mission, your mission of fulfilling the obligations of citizenship. Why do I say that? 3 words: accountability, integrity, and fairness. Those are the three principles that we as engaged citizens must demand from our government. And they are the three principles that are essential to the core duties of the Secretary of State, the chief guardian of Oregon's democracy. First, accountability. The Secretary of State has a unique constitutional responsibility as the state's chief auditor. With a national recession looming, it's all the more important that we honor every taxpayer dollar. As a leader in the Senate, I worked across the aisle to establish priorities in our budgeting process so that during times of economic downturn, the legislature is able to make decisions that protect our most vulnerable citizens. I champion performance-based budgeting, and I will champion performance auditing as your next Secretary of State, because accountability is more than an abstract value. It's a fundamental necessity if we are going to make government more efficient and more effective. The second key principle is integrity. As the officer charged with overseeing our initiative and campaign finance systems, the Secretary of State must put a premium on integrity, and that's exactly what I did as your Senate Majority Leader. In 2005, I brought Oregon to the forefront of the nation with transparent campaign finance reporting, so now Oregonians can follow the money in politics. And in 2007, I led the charge to crack down on fraud and abuse in Oregon's initiative system and preventing crooks from hijacking our very important initiative system. I fought special interests to pass the first ethics reform legislation our state has seen in over 30 years, and as a result, the Oregonian described 2007 as a watershed year for clean government in Oregon. I will bring a similar dedication to the Secretary of State's office. The third essential principle the Secretary of State must embody is fairness. I fought for fairness my entire career, from the very first bill I worked on as an advocate to our more recent victories on civil rights. Fairness has been at the heart of my commitment to public service. Fairness is what Oregonians deserve, and as your Secretary of State, it's exactly what I will deliver. Thank you very much.
Senator Metsger, you have opening statement, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate being assigned the middle podium. I assume that represents my centrist position in this debate. It is a pleasure to be here today with City Club and to honor, first of all, your service in providing public discourse on issues that are important to Oregonians. I'm running for Secretary of State because I believe the founding fathers of Oregon made this a constitutional office because they expect the Secretary of State to lead on the issues that are critical to the citizens of Oregon. I'm running for Secretary of State because I want to pursue what I have done in 9 years in the legislature of working for results rather than rhetoric. I am running on a platform that I would call E times 5: elections, education, efficiency, and environmentally sound economic development. As the Chief Elections Officer of the state, the Secretary of State is charged with the keys to our democracy, and it is absolutely critical to look at the fact that we have hundreds of thousands of Oregonians who are empowered to vote but do not because they do not believe they own their government. I will set up democracy centers in colleges, universities, and community colleges across the state to reach out proactively to young people about why their voice matters, empower them to make a difference, and fill that void which is now being taken by puppeteers from out of state in our elections process. It is appalling that it is required by state law to buy a car from a car dealer on 82nd Avenue, to buy a Junker 87 Buick, they have to disclose more to you than a signature gatherer does on the streets of Portland. I will make it absolutely possible and a requirement that more information is conveyed when you put a signature that could, in fact, actually drain hundreds of millions of dollars from our schools, public safety, and health care, and make sure the Secretary of State enforces those rules. Efficiencies. Performance auditing is a key part of state government. Not just determining how the money is being spent, but can we do it more efficiently, provide better results, and articulate to the legislature how to move forward with real change that will deliver better results. Economic development that is environmentally sound. As a member of the State Land Board, we have 2 million acres in trust to manage money for the Common School Fund, and in a socially and environmentally sustainable way. With the advent of renewable energies and our state goals for environmentally sound energy, we can be a better contributor to the Common School Fund and finally bridge that rural-urban divide by embracing our own state lands to move our state goals forward, to put more money into the Common School Fund, to create jobs for rural Oregon, and to advance the environmental goals that Oregonians have embraced. It's a matter of performance, not partisanship, and that's what I would bring to the office of Secretary of State.
Thank you. Senator Walker, your opening statement, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'm Vicki Walker, and I'm running for Secretary of State because Oregonians cannot afford politics as usual when it comes to counting your votes and your tax dollars. I've spent the last decade in Salem challenging the way we do business, shining a bright light on waste, fraud, and abuse, ensuring that everyone, no matter the size of your pocketbook, has a seat and a voice at the table. I led the efforts to put more money into the classroom with an 18% increase in K-12 funding, the largest we've seen in 20 years. I made college more affordable and accessible to Oregon families. And I put an end to secret settlement agreements by the government and lavish severance packages or golden parachutes by school administrators who are walking out the door with your hard-earned money. I went after Safe Corporation's extravagant spending on lobbyists. Over $40,000 a month was being spent. I held Safe accountable to injured workers and the employers whom they serve. And I challenged politics as usual by taking on the private utilities who are taking millions of dollars from ratepayers for taxes the utilities put in their pocket. This year alone, PGE customers will see $37 million in refunds as a result of my work. They say how you run your campaign is an indication of how you will govern. My campaign has been about big ideas, not big contributions, and wild spending or hiding behind 30-second sound bites. Politics as usual does not print a 16-page book full of ideas that gives Oregonians and my opponents hope about their future and what I expect to achieve as your next Secretary of State. I will protect the integrity of our elections, including our ballot measure system. I will defend your right to have redress from your government at the ballot, but I will work to stop people like Bill Sizemore and ballot measure hucksters who have hijacked our access to democracy. I'll publish the 5 largest contributors to ballot measure campaigns in the voters' pamphlet and aggressively work to prosecute those who violate our initiative laws. I strongly support campaign finance reform that takes big money out of elections. As the chief auditor of state government, I'll ask the tough questions to find out if corporate tax subsidies are actually delivering on the promise of economic prosperity with your tax dollar. And I will use our state trust lands not only to invest in our public schools, but to invest in a clean energy future that will create jobs in our rural communities and help protect our planet. There's an old saying that you've got to know where you're going before you get there. I've traveled over 14,000 miles in this campaign because I offer something unique: the record, the ideas, and the political courage to get the job done. Help me put an end to politics as usual by voting for Vicki Walker for Secretary of State on May 20th. Thank you.
Thank you very much, candidates. We now will move to the portion of the program where I will ask questions prepared in advance by City Club members and the general public. The candidate to whom the question is directed will have 60 seconds to respond to the question. Following each answer, the opposing candidates will have the option of a 45-second rebuttal. The candidates have not seen the questions in advance. Senator Metsger, the first question goes to you. In the United States, voter turnout in elections is fairly low compared to other established democracies around the world. Why do you think so many Oregon's eligible voters choose not to exercise their right to vote? And what would you do to encourage more Oregonians to vote in elections?
Thank you for the question and the opportunity to expand upon my opening remarks. I mentioned the hundreds of thousands of Oregonians who do not participate in the process, even though they own that right to vote. And it's because they don't feel they're making a difference. And that's why I think it is incumbent on the Secretary of State to establish a plan, a real plan of intervention with young people, beginning at the youngest of age, to understand why their vote is important and that they can, in fact, make a difference. And in the democracy centers that I would embrace and empower across the state, Part of the core principle of that will be to enlist the services of the 5,000 other elected officials in this state and ask them to be mentors in their own capacity to young people to embrace the difference that they can make in the election process. And I think if they see on the ground with people who care about our democracy and care about their voice, we will improve the number of people who are participating in the process when they see that they can actually have tangible results.
Thank you. Senator Walker, you have 45 seconds for rebuttal.
Thank you. In my Counting for Oregon plan, which you can pick a copy of outside, or if you're listening, you can get it on the web at vickiwalker.com. On pages 2 and 3, I go into detail about increasing voter participation. People don't want to participate in the process because they don't think their vote matters. For instance, we are the 5th from the bottom to vote in the presidential primary. It is only because we have a historic election, I believe, that this campaign is actually going to be relevant for Oregon. We will make a difference. I also want to increase voter registration opportunities like I did before I became a legislator, going into the high schools, especially when seniors pick up their caps and gowns. It's the one day they come to school. And also to take HAVA money and go out into the low-income and disenfranchised communities.
Senator Brown, you have 45 seconds for rebuttal.
Thanks for the question. One of my priorities is to register more Oregon voters. We have a relatively high voter turnout compared to the rest of the nation, and I think that's in part due to our fabulous vote-by-mail system, but we need to do more. I want to work with young people before they get to the age of voting at the middle school, high school level to get them involved in public policy-making processes so that they will know that their voices will be heard and their votes do matter. I'm a strong advocate of same-day voter registration. Young people tell me that will encourage them to participate in the process. And I am also a mentor of many young people, and I think that's a really wonderful tool to encourage young people to get involved in politics.
Senator Walker, the second question goes to you. There is little evidence that Oregon's unique vote-by-mail system produces higher voter turnouts. Furthermore, our vote-by-mail system allows just about any third parties, including senior center administrator, a church official, or even a political organization, to deliver signed ballots on behalf of their owners, a practice that might present a threat to the security of the ballot. What lessons have you learned from our experience with vote by mail, and what, if any, changes would you make to the system?
Well, I'm not sure what evidence it does show that we have less participation. I think Oregon is one of the highest participating states in the nation. We have a low registration rate, but people enjoy vote by mail. I think some of the things that you talk about, I have seen firsthand in the fact that I have supported the Democratic Party and I have gone out and I have picked up ballots from people. We have made sure that people get registered with the local county clerk so that we know who's going out and picking up ballots on behalf of Oregonians. I think that's a very secure way to make sure that the ballot gets from point A to point B and that there's no undue influence. I'd also like to see actually 2 people go out when they do that so that we can have 2 folks who can watch the other. But I think it's a very successful system. I think Oregon is on the cutting edge of the future, and there are other states who are looking to follow our lead.
Senator Brown?
Great question. I think in terms of vote by mail, one of the securities we have in terms of the ballot process is the signature verification. And that is the county clerks check every single signature. I had my county clerk call me and say, hey, we can't count your ballot because your signature doesn't match. I do think it's worth taking a look, and maybe what I would propose is that we audit the nursing home voting situation to make sure that there's no undue influence happening in senior centers around the state. And lastly, we need more security and more identification around the ballot boxes. The ballot drop sites, the official sites are not always clearly marked, and they need to be clearly marked. And I think there needs to be more ballot boxes available around the state for voters.
Thank you very much. Senator Metsger.
I will add that additional voting ballot boxes in rural Oregon, where that has been a real problem, is a critical part of making sure that we embrace all Oregonians, and I will certainly do that. I also believe that the vote-by-mail program has been embraced by Oregonians, and prior to going to vote by mail, we had 60% of all Oregonians were voting absentee, which was indirect vote by mail. And it is a system that allows people to take the time to actually read the arguments, listen to arguments like City Club, and vote. I do believe we need to be aggressive in terms of looking at any actions that are claimed to interfere with the voting process, but it's a balancing act, and embracing people who might otherwise not be able to go to polls is more important.
Thank you. Senator Brown, the third question goes to you. Two former Oregon Secretaries of State, Democrat Phil Kiesling and Republican Norma Paulus, advocate changing the state's current closed primary election system. In the current system, Democrats can only vote for Democratic candidates, Republicans can only vote for Republican candidates, and 500,000 unaffiliated voters can't vote in partisan races at all. All signs point to the likelihood that a proposed alternative, what has been called an open primary, will go before voters this November in the form of a ballot initiative. In an open primary, all candidates for a political office would run in the same primary election, which would be open to all voters regardless of party affiliation. The top two vote getters in the primary, even if they belong to the same political party, would then advance the November general election. Are you in favor or against the open primary, and why?
Thank you. With all due respect to my constituent Phil Kiesling and former Secretary of State Norma Paulus, I don't support the open primary, and I call it the top two, because that's essentially what it does, is allow the top two vote getters to move forward in the general. So a couple of things. It would substantially increase the cost of elections. Number two, those with the most name familiarity are more likely to move forward. And thirdly, and most concerning to me, is it substantially reduces options for voters in the general election when substantially more people participate. I want to encourage both the Republican and Democratic parties to open their primaries to non-affiliated voters. I think they should be doing that, and I encourage them to do that today.
Senator Metsger, you have 45 seconds for rebuttal.
Thank you. And this is one area in which I do disagree with my two colleagues. Senator Walker and I talked about this last night in Coos Bay. I do support the open primary. I do believe that's what engages Oregonians. The reason we have tens of thousands of people changing party affiliation for this election is not necessarily they've changed their ideology, but they want to have a voice in the direction of their country. I believe when you look at the state legislature right now, and half the candidates that are running have no opponents, that all we do is move to partisan ideologues on the right and the left, and then in the general election, no one really has a choice. This will provide that choice. It will provide more voices in the process of the election, and I think you will have different results in November when you embrace all voters and not just those of a political party.
Senator Walker, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you. And as Senator Metsger indicates, I'm the bookend to Senator Brown on that issue. I do not support the open primary for a number of reasons, mostly because the big issue in politics in Oregon isn't whether a non-affiliated voter can vote in your primary, it's campaign finance reform. And we're dancing around campaign finance reform with fusion voting, voting, instant runoff, and open primary. And while those all may be good and well and wonderful things, I think until Oregonians take their elections back and say, send big money packing, you're not going to see any significant difference in our election. It will always be the two people who can take the most money into their campaign account and move forward, and that's not a democracy that I support.
Thank you very much. Senator Metsger, you have expressed support for fusion voting. Please explain fusion voting, and why do you think it would be good for Oregon?
And this is the one-minute answer for fusion voting. Again, it encompasses what I have talked about before, and that is, as Secretary of State in particular, it is important to reach out and embrace all voters. Fusion voting allows other political parties to cross-endorse. So you can endorse a Democratic candidate if you were the Green Party candidate, or if you're the Working Families Party, you could also have your nomination go forward, and the candidate can assume to accept the nominations of multiple parties, so that you as a voter, when you look at the general election, that you're looking not necessarily just as a Democrat or a Republican, but can see other political parties that may share some of your values and where they align in the electoral process. I think it does provide more information. I think it's a positive step.
Senator Walker, you have 45 seconds for rebuttal.
Well, I agree with Senator Metzger. We have been trying to have fusion voting pass through the legislature for a couple of sessions, the 07 and 08 session. It's hard to describe fusion voting in a minute or two to the average voter, and it sounds sort of like sewing or something, you know, you're fusing fabric. But fusion voting does really allow for other parties and other to have an influence on the ballot, and I appreciate that. And that's one of the things that I'm looking at in terms of also whether that works well with instant runoff voting. But again, I will get back to the same issue. If you want to fix politics in Oregon, you've got to get out big money.
Senator Brown?
Thank you. I see one of the chief responsibilities of the Secretary of State is to work to engage more voters, and therefore I'm supportive of fusion voting. I passed the bill out of my committee in 2008. It died in the Ways and Means process. I'll continue to support it for 4 reasons. It engages voters on the issues. Young people are excited about fusion voting. It forces candidates, it holds candidates' feet to the fire, and it allows for engagement of third parties to help bring in folks on all sides of the political spectrum. So I'm very supportive of fusion. I think it makes sense, and I think Oregon should move forward on it.
Senator Walker, this is a very long question, so please bear with me. There are clear pros and cons to Oregon's initiative system. On the one hand, Oregonians deeply value the initiative pathway when the legislature fails to act on critical issues. On the other hand, critics all along the political spectrum point to the problem of poorly drafted ballot measures that result in higher than anticipated costs to taxpayers, and the transformation of what once was a grassroots initiative process into a business frequently fueled by out-of-state big money interests. Several other states have addressed these concerns through the use of what is called the indirect initiative system. Were such a system adopted in Oregon, the legislature would be required to hold public hearings and deliberate on all citizen initiatives that qualify for the ballot. The legislature would then have several options: either enact the initiative into law immediately or offer a competing alternative, one based upon more careful legislative deliberation, alongside the original initiative on the ballot. Do you support the creation of an indirect initiative system in Oregon? If not, how do you justify the continuation of the currently flawed initiative system?
Wow, I almost got my court reporting machine out to do that question. I do not support the indirect initiative. I know your city club has made that a recommendation, but for me, there are other ways to achieve your goal. I think the indirect initiative just delays public's redress against their government because we got to wait for the legislature to beat it up first. It's clear what the legislature is going to do or not do. So here are some of my proposals for the initiative system. The first one is to refer a constitutional amendment to the voters to prevent ballot measure hucksters like Bill Sizemore from filing any new ballot measures if they have repeat election law violations or fines. I will also print the 5 largest contributors to ballot measure campaigns in the voters pamphlet in large print. You don't have to wear your glasses, so you can see who's trying to buy your system. I also want to move the signature verification process into the Secretary of State's office to require 2 levels of review and consistency in training. And I also my time is out, but you can read more in my Counting for Oregon plan.
Thank you very much. Senator Brown, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you. In 2008, I passed a bill requiring out-of-state contributions to be highlighted on Oregon's transparent campaign finance reporting system so folks can clearly see when money is coming from out of state. I held hearings in 2008 on the indirect proposal. I will tell you, I think the fact that, and I'm supportive of, the Oregon legislature moving to annual sessions will in effect become the indirect initiative process, and I think it makes sense, and I think the Oregon voters will support it. Lastly, I support the concept of having retired judges participate in the ballot title process. We should be using those very valuable resources to help us in crafting ballot titles. And I also believe that we should be, oops, I'm running out of time.
Senator Metsger.
I'll finish for you, Senator Brown. Because I agree with Senator Brown on this issue. I do believe that proposal has merit. It's very common in Europe, and I know in Germany uses the indirect system, and it has been very, very valuable. But if we, in fact, move to annual sessions, I think we accomplish much of that goal. And I'll use an example in 2008 in which we are advancing to the ballot a measure on crime to compete with an initiative system, so you will have that side-by-side comparison. We came out with a rewrite of 37 called Measure 49. And again, on an annual basis, you'll have an opportunity for the legislature to assume the role of representative democracy, which we understand is what Oregonians want, and balancing that with the ability to redress their government if, in fact, the legislature does not act.
Thank you. Senator Brown, this question goes to you. There are frequent allegations of illegal payments and forged signatures in the signature gathering phase of Oregon's initiative and referendum system. Do you think the system's statistical sampling process used by the Secretary of State to verify signatures is an appropriate method for verifying signatures on petitions? Please explain.
Thank you. And I do believe that the statistical sampling is appropriate. It's a scientific method, and it's been upheld by the courts. However, given the what we've seen in the recent district court ruling in the Lemons case, I think we need to take a look at and give folks an opportunity. There were many of the signatures that were considered valid are not valid, and there were a number of folks whose signatures were considered invalid who were actually valid. So I think we need to take a look at the process and allow for an opportunity to cure an invalid signature and also for an opportunity to challenge signatures that are considered to be valid.
Senator Metsger.
It is absolutely critical that voters believe that their voice is being heard. It is true that the statistical sampling method, in fact, does work, even though my microphone may not. So if you would like me to speak louder, I will do so. The statistical sampling method does work, and I have tested that with the Secretary of State's office and confident in the results. However, everything has a margin of error. I do believe that in an initiative or a referendum situation in which the confidence level falls below the margin of error, for example, the governor's race that we saw in the state of Washington, that it would be incumbent upon the Secretary of State to count every signature if, in fact, the statistical sampling measurement falls below that standard in which the Secretary of State can for sure say that it is either going to the ballot or not, because that is what entrusts confidence to the electorate to use that system. It will happen rarely, but I think it's a step we need to take.
Thank you. Senator Walker.
Thank you. When the Lemons case was decided, I initially thought that verifying every signature was actually the best way to handle the problem. I since did a great deal of research and found that the statistical sampling method is valid. It is a valid method that's used all across the country. So then I worked with the Secretary of State's office on an alternative, and the alternative was Senate Bill 1083 in the 2008 session that would have brought the verification of signatures into the Secretary of State's office. I'm telling you, the county clerks do not want to do it anymore. They don't get sufficient training. They don't want to bother with it, so it will come in-house. We will train folks with forensics experts. The signatures will go through 2 levels of review. We'll have standards in applications, and I think it's a great answer to this problem.
Thank you very much. Senator Metsger, the next question for you. The Secretary of State is charged with conducting audits to protect the public interest and to improve Oregon government by reviewing programs of agencies in all 3 branches of the state government and other organizations receiving state money. What agencies or programs are on the top of your list, top 3 list, that desperately need auditing, and why? Top 3 list, please.
Thank you for the question. As chairman of the Business, Economic Development, and Transportation Committee, my committee has been at the heart of many of the expenditures of state government, having written the Oregon Transportation Investment Acts 1, 2, and 3, and Connect Oregon 1 and 2, as well as the Oregon Economic and Community Department budget. Those would be the very first 2 I would look at. Are we getting the results for economic development that were promised to us in the legislative body? Transportation is a critical part of the economy of our state. And if we're going to move forward on future transportation investments, the public has to know that those dollars are in fact being spent wisely, and if not, that we're taking corrective action. I was appalled to find out that small and minority-owned women businesses, which I specifically put into that bill, have not been awarded any contracts. We would have found that out through the auditing process. This is what we need to advance on. Economic development, the Community Development Department, and transportation would be the first three areas I'd look.
Thank you. Senator Walker?
Thank you. This is my strong suit. It has been for a number of years. In the last legislative session, I worked with Senator Frank Morris to pass a bill called the Committee on Performance Excellence to actually do something with these financial audits. My top three agencies to audit would be the Oregon Economic and Community Development Department, the Lottery Department, and the Department of Education. The first two, the Legislative Fiscal Office has determined they have the highest risk and lowest accountability for all of their funds. So I'm coming after them to find out how they're spending our money and whether we're getting value. The Department of Education, they haven't done a very good job. We have low achievement rates, we have a high dropout rate, and they just had someone siphon off a great deal of money out of the department from federal funds.
Thank you. Senator Brown?
Thank you. Oregon has done a pretty good job with our fiscal audits, what I call follow the money audits. What we are lagging behind the nation is in our performance auditing. And that is really asking the question, how can we deliver state services more effectively and more efficiently? The first agency that I would want to take a look at is the Department of Human Services. And that's because about 22% of your taxpayer dollar goes to that agency. And while we are doing good, as I said, fiscal auditing, I really think we need to be asking the question, how can we deliver these particular services better, in a more effective way, and get more bang for our taxpayer dollar?
Thank you. Senator Walker, another long question for you. According to the Oregon Constitution, every 10 years, shortly after each national census, the legislature is responsible for redrawing legislative districts, subject to the Supreme Court approval. If history serves as a guide, partisan bickering will likely prevent the legislature from agreeing upon an acceptable plan, and the task of redistricting will fall to the Secretary of State. Not surprisingly, past Secretaries of State have been accused of using this opportunity to redraw districts in ways that support his or her party. In 2007, the Public Commission on the Oregon Legislature recommended the creation of a nonpartisan commission to oversee redistricting and to ensure that the fundamental political right of every voter is not sacrificed to the imperatives of a partisan legislature or a partisan Secretary of State. If elected, will you be the first Secretary of State to put partisan politics aside and to support the creation of a nonpartisan redistricting commission? Please explain your position.
Wow, that's one I'm going to jump right into. The Register Guard recently endorsed my candidacy for Secretary of State on that basis. They called me fearless, and that I'm holding agencies accountable, and that I'm nonpartisan. I'm willing to challenge even members of my own party to do what's right for Oregon. So yeah, I would be willing to do that. Let me explain that commission piece. There are about half the states use a commission form of redistricting, the other half use commission and a legislature, so if the legislature fails to do it, then a commission comes in and does it. The problem with the commission system is that who's doing the appointing and who's getting appointed, so it's almost as bad as the legislature. So I would appoint my own advisory commission, very bipartisan, to assist in that. We would hold extensive public hearings, and let me tell you, there'd be no backroom deals, no backroom discussion about which legislator is going to stay in and which one's going to be drawn out.
Senator Brown?
I think, in short, the answer to your question is yes. I just received the endorsement of the Medford Mail Tribune. They were concerned about my role as an advocate for the Senate Democrats, so they talked to Republicans, and Republicans said I could be fair, and that's why I received their endorsement. I'm the only one in the race with hands-on experience with redistricting. In 2001, I crafted a congressional redistricting plan that the courts adopted because it was fair and balanced and representative of the entire state of Oregon. I would also appoint an independent panel of advisors. I would hold extensive hearings around the state, but I'm going to bet you that with Senate President Peter Courtney in charge of the legislature in 2011, that the Oregon legislature is going to be able to do redistricting.
Senator Metsger?
Part of the litmus test of a good Secretary of State is their ability to motivate people to come to their side of the room. It is very pleasing, since I first announced for this office 5 months ago that I would support a public commission on redistricting, that all of my colleagues now are enthusiastic about that issue. While we're passing around endorsements, the Bin Bulletin said of me that I am the only candidate in this race who is not bound by a partisan straitjacket. I'm the only candidate who has advocated this race be a nonpartisan position, because we should serve the needs of people, not the needs of a party. Yes, I would have a commission. I would actually advocate for retired judges. We would create this plan in public, not behind closed doors, to hold me accountable for the end result.
Thank you. Senator Brown, Oregon is one of the only handful of states in the nation with no limits on campaign contributions for state and local elections. You're on record as a supporter of campaign contribution limits, but Oregon Attorney Generals and the Oregon Supreme Court have repeatedly argued or ruled that such limits constitute a violation of Oregon's free speech clause, perhaps one of the strongest free speech clauses of any state in the nation. What, if anything, would you do as Secretary of State to support real campaign finance reform?
Thank you. Well, what I've already done was pass the transparent campaign finance reporting system in 2005. Oregon is now rated the top 3 in the nation for transparency and accountability for campaign finance. That's not good enough. We need to create a special, unique Oregon system. There are a couple of proposals that I think need to be on the table. One is limits, and that means amending the Constitution. The second is public finance, and the third is our $12 million political tax credit. I think it's important that we have a system that enables a diverse pool, both racially and economically, the diverse pool of candidates to run for office. I think it's important that candidates do not spend all of their time fundraising, and I think it's also important that folks with small amounts of money be able to play a role. So I will put together a diverse group of citizens, like I did with a campaign finance reporting system, and come up with a uniquely situation for campaign finance.
Senator Metsger.
In my first year in the legislature in 1999, I authored a bill on campaign finance reform and recognized that the Oregon Constitution was extremely strict. One of the things I would do is use this position to advocate to Oregonians to make a very narrow exception in our free speech provision, to put some limitations and define that a corporation is in fact not a person and does not have exactly the same rights. You know, we can talk a lot about campaign finance reform, but when you look at the record, the leadership of the Oregon legislature has not wanted to move on campaign finance reform at all. It is what puts people into power. I have been a beneficiary of that in the past. I understand that. But it takes leadership to make a change. You know, Senator Brown, for example, has got more money from 4 sources than I have generated in 4 months, and I've done a pretty good job on the campaign trail. We have to be serious about it.
Senator Walker.
Thank you. This is in my Counting for Oregon plan again. Darn it, redistricting was not, so that you'll have to wait for the second edition on that one. But in my Counting for Oregon plan, the first place we can start is to prohibit pass-through contributions of money from one candidate or political action committee to another. Imagine that. You know the problem with that? You can't follow the money. You get large contributions given to other candidates, and then they write a big check to someone else, and where did that money come from? We have no way to know. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled or the federal government passed the Federal Election Campaign Act in 1971, and the U.S. Supreme Court in 1976 in Buckley versus Vallejo says we can have contribution limits as long as you don't limit someone's ability to get their message out. So I would propose a constitutional amendment to do just that.
Thank you very much. We're entering a new part of our program. During this portion of the program, each candidate will have the opportunity to ask one other candidate a question. Questions must be asked in 30 seconds. The candidate to whom the question is directed will have 1 minute to respond, after which the questioner, the original questioner, will have the option of a 30-second rebuttal. We will begin with Senator Walker.
Thank you. My question is for Senator Brown. You have just told the audience today that you favor reforming our campaign finance system, yet in your 5 years overseeing the Rules and Elections Committee, not one bill reforming campaign finance is passed, and very few have even received public hearings. You've also by far been the largest recipient of special interest money in this campaign. would it be reasonable for voters to assume you've benefited from the status quo and have no real interest in changing anything?
I actually have worked my entire career to change the status quo. When I first came to the Oregon legislature and the Oregon Senate, Democrats were outnumbered 2-1. I knew that in order to move Oregon forward, we needed to change the makeup of the state Senate. So I went to work to change the status quo. I spent 8 years working to elect a progressive majority. I spent a number of years working to pass civil rights for all Oregonians, dedicated 18 years of my life to doing that. In my work on my Rules Committee, we passed a number of amazing bills. The first I mentioned, transparent campaign finance reporting. In this last session, we tackled the initiative system with Initiative Reform Modernization Act, and also brought the first ethics change to the Oregon in the last 30 years. There hasn't been a major change to Oregon's ethics laws since the Watergate era. I have spent my entire legislative career dedicated to change, and I will continue that work as your next Secretary of State.
Thank you very much. Senator Walker, you have an opportunity to rebut
Yes,
for 30
thank you.
seconds.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate your response, but your lavish contributions and expenditures have indicated to me that there is no interest in having a level playing field when it comes to campaign finance reform. There were 2 bills specifically in the Senate Rules Committee last session on campaign finance reform recommended by the Public Commission on the Legislature. Neither of them moved forward. The Register Guard has indicated that you are well-wired politically, and it raises doubts about your ability to fight for groups outside the mainstream Democratic establishment. So I do have concerns about that.
Thank you very much. Senator Brown, you have an opportunity to ask a question. 30 seconds, please.
Thank you, Rod. This race is like no other, in that we have 3 senators vying for the same seat. As the Senate Democratic leader for the last 9 years, I worked side by side with my colleagues. I worked very hard to get them elected.
I'm sorry, this is for your question. You have an opportunity to ask a question.
I am
Oh,
going
okay,
to.
okay.
Thank you. Sorry. Just because we are running against each other now, well, can I start again if that's okay? This race is like no other. We have 3 senators from the Senate Democratic Caucus vying for the same seat. I worked for 9 years as the Democratic leader, working to get my colleagues elected, including my 2 colleagues on the podium today. Just because we're running against each other, I'm not interested in tearing them down today. So my question for you, Senator Metsger, is very simple. What is your favorite flavor of ice cream?
Rocky Road.
Given your life's travails, I'm not surprised, Senator Metsger.
Okay, all right, that's great. Okay, Senator Metsger, you can ask a question. 30 seconds, please.
I think I'd like to address mine to Senator Walker. Senator Walker, you have made a point during this campaign trail that you shine a bright light on government and that you intend to bring transparency to a new level in state government. Looking over recent campaign finance reporting, I see for the second time you have received a significant contribution from the Northwest Nudist Recreation Association. Is this indicative of what you call transparency in government?
Yes, Senator Metsger, yes. That's fascinating that you have discovered that, but you know, these are a great group of folks. They just like to be naked, and you know, I think that's just fine, and they do send me campaign contributions quite regularly. I'm not sure what pocket they put them in, but thank you for the question.
Senator Metsger, you have 30 seconds to rebut that, if you can.
This is the wonderful ORSTAR system that Senator Brown was talking about, so you can track the money. You just don't know where it is once you find it. But I do believe that on a very serious note, on the issue that we've been talking about, is the reason people raise so much money is it's so difficult to communicate with people like you. And just imagine if we could have forums like this everywhere in the state and people would be engaged. You wouldn't have to, with apologies to the moderator, have to pay $9,500 to run a 30-second spot on American Idol. I mean, this is what our government is about, is communicating together. Campaign finance reporting is a critical part of that.
Thank you, Senator. We will now move to the final portion of the program, 2 minutes for a closing statement from each candidate. These will be given in reverse alphabetical order. We will begin with Senator Walker.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure being here with you today. You know, when I was in Reedsport High School, I had an extraordinary guidance counselor, and his name was Rudy Rupee. Rudy knew I was one of those kids who might not make it through high school because of the extreme adversity in my life. I won't even go into it. But what makes me remember Rudy isn't just his kindness. It's that he was able to look beyond himself despite being crippled by Lou Gehrig's disease and facing the end of his own life. And he was able to see something in me, right here, that I didn't even know was there. Rudy's body failed him, but his courage propelled my education. He made me believe that I counted, that I was important, and that I should be listened to. I'm running for Secretary of State because every person, whether in Reedsport, Roseburg, or Redmond, should count. Every person deserves a voice and a seat at the table. The Secretary of State is the nexus of our votes and our values. We need to show Oregonians that we're listening and delivering on the promise of creating a better government and a better future for all of us. I'm running for Secretary of State because no office more fundamentally defines the difference that one person can make if she has the courage. During the last 10 years in the legislature, I've proven that I have courage to move Oregon forward. I've stood up to fraud and abuse in this state in order to protect the interests of those who elected me to this position. And I've had the courage to print a 16-page booklet full of ideas about how to make government work for you. My hometown newspaper said I have a knack for calling attention to issues my colleagues have overlooked and built a reputation as a lawmaker who will fight for the powerless. If I have your support May 20th, I promise you that you will never be overlooked, you will never be powerless, and you will always have someone in Salem looking out for you.
Thank you. Senator Metsger.
Thank you, and again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. As the only Democratic legislator in the last 12 years to be elected in a district that crosses the Cascade Mountains, I understand what we mean by the rural-urban divide. There is nothing more important in state government than the Secretary of State, which is designed to embrace the voices and encourage participation by all citizens, that you do indeed represent all of Oregon. We represent in this position an important opportunity for Oregon. I'm pleased in being endorsed by the Portland Tribune in their comments saying that I best represent the needs of all Oregonians. This office should represent the needs of Oregonians, not the needs of a political party. That's why I'm the only one who supports this as a nonpartisan position, because there's nothing partisan about elections or knowing where your money goes. I came to the Senate in 1999 to advocate for consumer change, to allow credit union members to come from small businesses and individuals, although the banking industry tried to stop that from happening. It stopped in the 1997 legislature and forced me to run with hundreds of volunteers supporting me for consumer choice. And when I came to the legislature, I did not use a combative style, but a collaborative style. And 30-0 in the Senate and 60-0 in the House of Representatives and signed by Governor Kitzhaber, we gave consumer choice. As the Oregonian has commented on my candidacy a year ago for the Senate, that I have served in the legislature with one major goal, and that is to serve the interests of ordinary Oregonians. That's what you expect in a Secretary of State, one who represents you, not represents a political party, and moves Oregon forward. Thank you very much for the opportunity today.
Thank you. Senator Brown.
Thank you, and thanks for being here today. Earlier, I spoke about 3 key principles: accountability, integrity, and fairness. To make those principles a reality, it also takes 2 important qualities in the person you elect to be Secretary of State. First, a commitment to hard work, and a second, a heartfelt belief in the mission of the office. I have both. When it comes to hard work, that's what exactly made me a successful leader in the Senate. When I first came to the Senate, it was under conservative control, and the voices of many Oregonians were not being heard. I knew then that to move Oregon forward, we needed to change the balance of power. So I rolled up my sleeves and went to work. I had a plan and a vision for a progressive majority, and I delivered on that plan. And as a result, in 2007, we had one of the most productive legislative sessions in decades. We created a rainy day fund, we did record funding for schools, we expanded the bottle bill, and finally extended civil rights to all Oregonians. My hard work as Senate Majority Leader helped deliver these positive changes for Oregon. I will bring that same level of persistence to the Secretary of State's office. Your next Secretary of State must also believe passionately in the mission of the office. For me, I have a very personal understanding of that mission. When I first ran for the legislature, I ran against a 3-term incumbent and was outspent 2-1, and I won by 7 votes. If those votes hadn't been counted, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to build a majority and help usher in the historic progress we saw last session. As a result, I have a profound belief in the importance of making sure that every voice is heard and every vote is counted. That is the kind of deep-felt conviction we need in the person we elect to be the guardian of Oregon's democracy, and it is a conviction I will bring as your next Secretary of State. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
On behalf of the City Club of Portland, I'd like to thank Rod Grammer, our moderator, our timekeeper, again, John Horvick, our 3 panelists, the City Club members who help think about these questions, and finally, thank you to our 3 candidates, Vicki Walker, Rick Metsger, and Kate Brown. We appreciate your commitment to serving us and for giving us a lively and interesting debate today. We're adjourned.